Hey Sarah, where are we?
I'm not quite sure. we have left Paris, we've left central Paris, and we are in Saint-Denis.
Yeah, we left our studio in the heart of Paris for the first time actually, and we just arrived in the suburbs.
Yes, just came out of the metro. We have the marketplace just in front of us. People are packing up after today's business, and we are heading to the central piece, we can say, of Saint-Denis.
Yeah, the famous basilic where all the former kings of France are buried. So let's go there.
Bonjour. Welcome to the So French podcast, the show about the twists and turns, intrigues and insights to all things French.
Every 2 weeks, we select the best, most interesting and fascinating of French news stories, all brought to you from, well, today, the Parisian suburb of Saint-Denis. My name is Stephen Vries.
And my name is Sara Bertilsson.
And this week we bring you the first part of our So French special summer edition. Every 2 weeks we talk with an author based here in Paris or in France and who has written a book or many books about France. And, well, today, Sarah, as we've mentioned, we're no longer in Paris. Where are we?
Today we are in the Parisian suburbs, the banlieue in Saint-Denis to be exact. And we're here to focus on France outside of Paris for once, often characterized as poor, violent, problem-laden, but of course filled also with potential and creativity.
And history, because this week it's Quatorze Juillet, the national holiday. How do you celebrate that, Sarah?
With a big bottle of champagne and baguette and some cheese, I would assume.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to celebrate it. But we're also in Saint-Denis because this is the place where all the kings are buried, the French kings, or were buried actually. And the story about that is going to be told by Stephen Clarke. He's joining us now, a very prolific writer. He wrote many books about French history, but also very funny books about living in France. Maybe you know A Year in the Merde, but he just published some books about the monarchy, and that's why he is our guest. Welcome, Stephen. Yeah, we're sitting here literally in the shade of the Basilique Saint-Denis with Stephen Clarke, the Franco-English. Do you already have a French passport, actually?
I don't have a French passport, but I'm kind of regretting it, because of Brexit. I really don't want to be standing in lines behind a bunch of English Brexit voters trying to get into the EU on holiday. So, no.
But you have to get one because we want to keep you here.
Well, I'm hoping that the British government isn't stupid enough to throw all the EU immigrants out of Britain, because then I might get thrown out of France. But I'm sure even they're not that stupid.
Now, we're here with you because, you're a very prolific writer about anything French. You just published a very funny book, The French Revolution and What Went Wrong, and also a book about King Edward VII, Dirty Bertie, or in French it is called...
It's called Edouard VII, un roi anglais made in France.
And the Roi Anglais made in France, and also a book on Elizabeth II, or the humour. Now we're here. This is an important place for the French Revolution, of course, in Saint-Denis. All the kings are buried here. But what happened here during the Revolution?
What happened out in Saint-Denis during the Revolution was pretty violent and unpleasant, and it's a kind of side issue. What people did was they came out and they dug up kings who'd been buried here for centuries. They also buried a few royals and aristocrats out here. But that wasn't the real revolution. For me, the real revolution, obviously, was what was going on at first, was what was going on out in Versailles, when the Assemblée Nationale, the first true or more or less democratic French parliament was formed, before the 14th of July, before the Bastille was stormed, there was a lot of revolutionary stuff happening out in Versailles. And for me, that's why I wrote my book. For me, the revolution started way before the 14th of July, way before Bastille, founded by some really highly principled democratic politicians who don't get enough recognition today. We all hear about today is, Robespierre, Danton, Marat and all that. For me, they weren't the heroes. The heroes were the people before that who got democracy going. So what happened here in Saint-Denis was just part of the violence that was going on during the revolution. The violence, which was a horrible side product of what was a quite sort of democratic, well-principled revolution.
Now, we're broadcasting this on the 14th of July, Quatorze Juillet. I guess it's one of your, looking at your face, one of your favorite holidays of the year.
My favorite holiday, yes. Actually, the idea to write this book of the French Revolution and what went wrong came to me while I was watching a 14th of July parade, and I was thinking, why am I seeing tanks and soldiers marching through Paris to celebrate the national day? Is that what France is all about? Why isn't it a bunch of bakers and pâtissiers and winemakers? That's what France is about. Why tanks? And you see the airplanes overhead, practically you can see the price tags on them floating behind them. Why are they selling arms? And I looked into the 14th of July and I found out what a violent occasion the storming the Bastille was, and it made me wonder why the hero worship about the people who stormed the Bastille. And what I found out was that the Bastille was not a revolutionary a royalist sort of torture centre, as people make it out. What it was a place where mainly aristocrats were put, sometimes by their own family to stop them getting into worse trouble than they were already in. It was quite a luxurious prison, and at the time of the revolution there were only seven prisoners in there, all of whom were put back in prison after the revolution. The reason why people went to storm the Bastille was because there was gunpowder. They wanted gunpowder. And this riot in Paris wasn't by any means the first riot, which made me a bit suspicious about, why did they celebrate the storming of the Bastille? The day before, I think it was, a very similar mob pillaged a convent, stole all the food in it, which a lot of which was destined for the hospital next door. They drank all the wine. I think about half a dozen of the rioters drowned in the wine. They just smashed the barrels and drowned in the cellars. It was, why don't they celebrate that day? Wine drowning day. It would be quite a good French holiday.
It will be on the 13th of July. We will all go into barrels of wine.
Exactly, yeah. And they'd also, previously, the rioters had stormed a wallpaper factory and burnt that down. Why don't they have wallpaper burning day? They chose the Bastille because it was a prison, but in fact, what I found out was the riots on the 14th of July 1789 were seen by the true Democrats out in Versailles at the Assemblée Nationale as a sad thing, because they realised that Parisians needed help, they needed more food, bread prices were going up, there was a famine. They realised there was a problem, but they just thought this rioting was the wrong way to go about it. And the ironic thing I found out was that at that time, this semi-democratic, it wasn't completely democratic, Parliament were working with the king. The king was actually part of the process, and they swore allegiance to the king. And even more amazingly, on the 14th of July 1790, there was a celebration in Paris at which the king was the guest of honour. And a massive crowd of aristocrats, clergymen, soldiers and the public swore allegiance to the king. They wanted the king to be there. They didn't want to cut his head off. They wanted a democratic, British-style constitutional monarchy. Now, we're just not told this about the revolution in France today. We just think it's 14th of July 1789, suddenly there was liberté, égalité and fraternité. That's wrong.
So why has this story about the French Revolution, what we have all learned in school, why is that story that way then, you think?
I think it's convenient because, storming a prison sounds better than storming a wallpaper factory. It's a convenient date. But the ironic thing, again, is that the 14th of July was only chosen because there'd been similar uprisings in other cities in France where they'd actually taken over the town hall and things like that and imposed and thrown out the sort of corrupt aristocratic local governments, which did need throwing out, and the Assemblée Nationale was trying to throw them out, and Louis XVI, the king, was actually trying to throw them out as well. It was the aristocrats that people hated, not the king. And in other cities, they'd already started to celebrate this, and Paris sort of thought, well, we have to celebrate something. What date can we choose? And so they said, well, they said, okay, it's not yet the 14th of July, 1790, so we'll do it on that day. So from the very first year, they chose this date almost as a random date because it was the first convenient one, but only because they wanted to have the same celebrations that were going on elsewhere. And ever since then, it's been kind of raised, up to on a pedestal as a kind of national day of, reckoning. Whereas for me and for the people at the time, because what I did is I went back to the parliamentary archives to read what the parliamentarians were saying. And they were saying that, this is terrible, we have to, end this rioting. The revolutionaries out in Versailles were saying we have to stop this rioting. It wasn't the king. The king didn't send any troops to stop it. The revolutionaries wanted to stop it.
But don't you think that this... because when you listen to French politicians today, the French society today, it's very much built on the idea of a society and a country and a nation built from a revolution.
Yeah, sure. But the thing is, I think in most cases, they don't know the truth of what the revolution was, because there was more than one revolution. And the sad thing I found out was that you had the initial revolution when the Assemblée Nationale was founded, before July the 14th. They wrote a new constitution which was incredibly sexist. There was no mention of women's rights. And women, even later on in the revolution, women were threatened with death for complaining. And famous women like Olympe de Gouges, a writer who wrote the Declaration of Women's Rights, she was executed just for criticising Robespierre and all that for being sexist. So, liberté, égalité, fraternité did not happen in 1789. It took 100 years for it to happen. And so I think there's a lot of romanticism going on about what happened in 1789, because what I found was that in 1789, democratic reform began, which was too slow. And the aristocrats also managed to stop it getting too serious. So what it did was it let populists in, and who used fake news and riots and things like that. People like Robespierre, Danton and all that, they were whipping up the crowd. And suddenly the revolution turned horribly violent. People who know about La Terreur and the guillotinings, but they don't talk so much about the civil war and genocide in the west of France, when I think it was about 40,000 people were massacred in the west of France for rebelling against the revolution, when all they were doing was saying that they didn't want the peasants didn't want to send their sons into a revolutionary army. They wanted them to stay at home and work in the fields, and they were considered counter-revolutionaries and massacred. And I found out that approximately 300,000 people, French people, were killed by other French people between 1789 and about 1799, when there was such a political vacuum that Napoleon, this young general, stepped in, took power, became a dictator, and then an emperor. And so, just over 10 years after 1789, France was an empire. It didn't change anything. It took 100 years, how many more monarchies? You had Louis XVIII, you had Charles X, and Louis Philippe. You had 3 more kings before it became a republic. 1789 did not change things as much as people are told today.
Now, you also publish books about the British monarchy. What's your personal fascination with kings and queens?
Well, the funny thing was that my book about Elizabeth II, which in French is called Elisabeth II ou l'humour souverain, or it's out on Kindle in English, Elizabeth II, Queen of Laughs, it was the French who asked me to write it. Because the French, this is the funny thing, it's the French who are obsessed with the British monarchy. The French... every time there's a royal wedding or a baby, they send all their journalists over there. I get invited. I was on TV and French TV and radio for days on ends just before that wedding and during the wedding. They're fascinated. And I asked them why. I spent most of my time saying, why are you inviting me? You're a republic. Why do you care about the royal family? And it struck me that it's quite a serious point that during the revolution, in fact, what the revolution did is kind of it created a void at the heart of French consciousness, because even if you don't particularly like the Queen or the royal family and you think they're privileged, which they are, in Britain we have this thing which is that even if our politicians are completely incompetent, which they often are, especially at the moment, there's this thing above them, beyond them. There is a national identity elsewhere, which at the moment is personified by the Queen. Whether you like the Queen or not, whether you think she's privileged and rich and old-fashioned, at least she's there, and we have this continuity, this historical continuity, which is some kind of national identity. I mean, I'm